Imagine a rope, a simple coil of woven nylon hanging from a cliff face. Now, imagine that rope has been there for 15 years, a silent witness to a story that no one could tell. Below it, at the base of the sheer rock, lie the scattered bones of two men, Alex and Ben, who disappeared into the treacherous vastness of the Gloomridge Peaks. The scene itself is a paradox, a final, horrifying tableau of a climb that began with hope and ended in tragedy. It is a story not of a fall, but of something far more sinister, a cold case that for 15 years refused to yield its secrets. What kind of person could leave such a morbid monument to their cruelty, and why did they do it? That was the mystery that shrouded the peaks for a decade and a half, a question whispered in hushed tones by the locals who knew that the Gloomridge did not give up its dead easily. Alex Sterling and Ben Carter were not professional climbers. They were two friends in their late 20s, both working as graphic designers in the city, who had a shared love for the outdoors. Their plan was a modest one, a weekend trip to tackle a moderately challenging route on the eastern face of Gloomridge. It was a well-known path, popular with amateur adventurers, and they had studied maps and weather forecasts extensively. They were well prepared but not overconfident, and they told their families that they expected to be back by Sunday evening. Their last communications were mundane, a text message to Alex's mother saying the weather was holding, and a quick call from Ben to his girlfriend, promising to bring back a picture of the summit view. These simple exchanges would become the last anchors to a timeline that was about to disappear entirely. The Gloomridge Peaks were a formidable and indifferent presence, a sprawling expanse of jagged granite and dense forest that stretched for miles. The mountains were not known for their friendly, rolling hills, but for their sudden, brutal inclines and unexpected crevasse. It was the kind of place that could swallow a person whole, a fact that would become grimly apparent in the days to follow. The solitude was its chief appeal for the climbers, but it was also the very thing that made it a perfect stage for a disappearance. The vast, silent landscape offered no easy answers, no clear tracks, and no witnesses. When Monday morning arrived and the men had not returned, the first stirrings of concern began. Alex's mother, knowing her son's punctuality, called the local sheriff's office. At first, the response was measured. People often underestimated the time a climb would take. Perhaps a minor injury had delayed them, or they had simply taken a detour. But as the day bled into Tuesday and their cell phones went straight to voicemail, the initial concern blossomed into a full-blown panic. The authorities mobilized a search operation, a massive undertaking that drew on every available resource. Police and mountain rescue teams scoured the designated climbing route, their shouts echoing through the quiet valleys. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras flew low over the rock faces, their blades a frantic buzzing sound against the stillness. Volunteers, many of them experienced climbers themselves, fanned out across the lower slopes, calling out Alex and Ben's names. They found no sign of a fall, no discarded gear, no cairn of stones left behind as a marker. The search was a grueling and ultimately futile exercise in a landscape that seemed to actively resist being explored. Every logical theory was considered and then dismissed. There was no evidence of foul play, no struggle. A simple accident seemed plausible, but they could find no body, and a fall from the cliff face would have surely left some trace. They ran checks on the men's bank accounts and found no activity since their departure. They hadn't run away. They had simply vanished. The active search was called off after 2 weeks, a grim but necessary decision. The case was reclassified as a missing persons report, a file on a shelf gathering dust. For the families, the silence was unbearable. It was a perpetual state of limbo, with no body to mourn and no grave to visit. The hope, once a fierce flame, flickered and died over the course of the next several years, replaced by a dull, aching emptiness. It was a mystery without a clue, a tragedy without a conclusion. 8 years passed. The story of Alex and Ben became a local legend, a ghost story told around campfires. The Gloomridge Peaks were now viewed with a new kind of respect, tinged with a superstitious dread. People knew to stay away from the eastern face. The case was cold, frozen in time, and everyone believed it would remain that way forever. But then a bizarre discovery was made, not by a seasoned investigator, but by two teenage boys on a dare. They were exploring an old, rusted-out mine shaft on a rarely used trail, looking for scraps of discarded copper. They found what they believed was an old piece of rope, and they decided to pull on it, hoping to dislodge some hidden treasure. What they found, instead, sent them running in terror. The rope was a climbing rope, weathered and frayed, and it was tied securely to a rusted piton, hammered into a rock outcrop near the mine's entrance. Following it, they found a small, dark hole in the side of the cliff, a fissure that led into a small cave system. Inside, stacked with disturbing precision against a rock wall, were two human skeletons. The boys' frantic call to emergency services reignited the cold case with a terrible new energy. The discovery location was shocking and unnatural. A cave was not where climbers would fall. Forensic experts were called in immediately, and their analysis of the remains yielded a horrifying new truth. The bones, identified through dental records as belonging to Alex and Ben, were not broken from a fall. Alex's hyoid bone was fractured, a telltale sign of manual strangulation. Ben had several deep penetrating wounds to his ribs and skull, consistent with a pickaxe or some similar tool. Their deaths were not accidental. They were murdered. The scene was clinically eerie. Their skulls had been placed on top of their rib cages, and their hands rested over their femurs, as if someone had arranged them with a grotesque sense of order. Lying next to the skeletons were their climbing gear, their backpacks, and a tattered map of the peaks. But something was missing. Their camera and cell phones were nowhere to be found. The discovery of the bodies was a grim climax, a turning point that shifted the narrative from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation. Detectives, with new purpose and a terrifying new context, began to retrace the steps of the original investigation. They reviewed the initial reports, looking for any detail that might have been overlooked. They spoke to every local resident who had been interviewed 15 years prior. They looked for anyone with a history of strange behavior or a known dislike for outsiders. Their focus landed on a man named Silas Thorne, a reclusive trapper who lived in a ramshackle cabin not far from where the men's remains were found. Thorne was a known eccentric, paranoid, and secretive, and his property was a mess of junk and discarded items. He had been interviewed back then, but he had simply stated that he had not seen the climbers. Now, in the light of the new evidence, that alibi seemed flimsy. The detectives obtained a search warrant and descended on Silas Thorne's property. It was a desolate, overgrown piece of land, littered with traps and rusted machinery. Inside his cabin, they found a place frozen in time. The furniture was old and dusty, and the walls were adorned with peculiar taxidermy. But it was in a locked chest that they found the damning evidence that would break the case wide open. Inside the chest, wrapped in a faded cloth, were Alex Sterling's camera and Ben Carter's cell phone. They were both in perfect condition. On the camera, they found a series of photos. The last few pictures were mundane, a few shots of the trail and the view from the summit. But the final photo was a grainy, chaotic image, taken from a low angle, showing the blurred form of a man with a wild, angry expression, holding something in his hand. It was the face of Silas Thorne. Confronted with the evidence, Silas Thorne did not resist. He confessed to the murders in a cold, emotionless tone. His motive was a chilling revelation of banal, senseless evil. He told the detectives that he had found the two climbers on his property, just a short distance from the mine. He had been trapping for rabbits, and they had accidentally stumbled upon his camp. They apologized and said they would turn back, but Silas claimed they were trespassing. He said they were laughing at him, looking down on him as if he were a fool. He felt a rage build inside him, a hatred for the outsiders who invaded his solitude and mocked his simple life. He attacked them, strangling Alex first, then using a pickaxe he had been carrying to strike Ben multiple times. He then dragged their bodies to the mine, arranged the bones as if for display, and left their rope hanging from the cliff as a twisted warning to anyone who dared to come near his land. Silas Thorne was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. His trial was a short, brutal affair. The evidence was overwhelming, and his confession was chillingly detailed. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He was a man who had murdered for no other reason than a perceived disrespect, a man whose profound lack of empathy allowed him to live for 15 years with his secret in plain sight. The case was closed, the mystery solved, but the tragedy remained. 2 young men, full of life and hope, had their lives ended by a monster hidden in the peaks, a paranoid loner whose small, pathetic rage had extinguished 2 bright futures. The rope, a final, horrifying link to their last moments, was eventually removed, but the memory of their fate would forever hang over the Gloomridge Peaks, a somber and permanent memorial to a senseless crime.